So we're going to give you a little crash course on how to interpret and think about the ways of knowing so you can go into TOK full throttle. No, my God, that's awful.
I think you should keep it.
With me today is one of my best friends, Luca. He's going to Harvard in the fall, and we did all of our TOK classes together.
Hopefully this background will give you a bit of a jumping off point when you enter TOK, so you're a little bit more prepared, because it does have a lot of unique concepts.
The first 4 ways of knowing are pretty self-explanatory. Sense perception is how we take in the world around us.
Memory, things that you know because you remember learning them by some other way of knowing. Reason, it's just things that you know through your use of reasoning and logic. So anything you know through reasoning has to be based off of some other knowledge you already have. Reason in Western culture has been viewed as like the superior way of knowing. If somebody knows something using reason, then they assume that that trumps all other ways of knowing. So it's really important in TOK to at least acknowledge your assumption that you're placing reason above all other ways of knowing.
Intuition, which is anything you know by kind of your gut sense.
A lot of people have trouble seeing it in an academic context. You'll be using these ways of knowing to analyze real world situations. It's important to acknowledge that sometimes people act based on knowledge that there isn't necessarily any sense perception or reasoning that led them to this conclusion. It's just kind of their gut sense. Faith. This is another one that a lot of people have trouble with seeing in an academic context, but just in the same way as intuition, there are lots of times in the real world that people act based on knowledge that they have just resulting from faith.
Faith, regardless of if it's religious faith or maybe scientific faith or a different genre of faith.
Political faith?
Yeah, political faith. It's all different variations of the same way of knowing. It's a belief in something that you trust.
And it's important to recognize that different people have faith in different things. It can lead to maybe a little bit more heated debate if you fail to acknowledge the assumptions you're making and if different people have faith in different things.
Emotion is another one of these that's difficult to talk about because it seems so wishy-washy. And I think emotion is really important when you're analyzing what different knowers know, but I wouldn't use it as a point of analysis when talking about how knowledge is constructed because it's so personal and so dependent on the individual and their experiences.
Yeah, so another concept that you'll talk about in TOK is shared knowledge versus personal knowledge. And emotion barely contributes to shared knowledge. It's really only useful when you're talking about personal knowledge. And this one is sometimes hard to differentiate from intuition, but I would say the best way to separate the difference between those is intuition. If you're thinking of a gut response, it's maybe not necessarily directly caused by some event or an action, whereas emotion is like your emotional response. So it's a little bit more cause and effect. Imagination. It's not necessarily just that I can imagine like a unicorn and then I know unicorns are real. That's not what this is saying. I think this one is especially useful when people know something based on imagining a hypothetical situation. Imagine your car breaking down or whatever, then you might know certain things about what to do based off of yourself like imagining this hypothetical situation. And that's really useful in like decision making.
Language. This one is the one that's probably the most difficult for new TOK students to grasp. You might think that language as a way of knowing is just communication, how we learn from others through speech. It's really not. Any word in every language is so saturated with meaning that really the language as a way of knowing is studying how this rhetoric really shapes what we're thinking and how that other meaning beyond the word shapes what we perceive and what we know.
The connotations that go behind a word include the assumptions that you're making about the things that are being talked about. In the movie Mean Girls, when Katie says that she came from Africa, they say, if you're from Africa, then why are you white? And this is just one example of associations that we tend to make with words.
So that scene in Mean Girls is really telling of how language shapes our assumptions. Because as soon as they say she's from Africa, you think XYZ about what Africa is and what someone from Africa is to you. So it shows you kind of what language has built in your mind for each word. You've already come up with what you think something's going to be, and that can lead you to knowing something that you wouldn't otherwise know using a different way of knowing. Try to imagine thinking about something without having the word for it. We always describe the world as a continuum. And language creates cuts in the continuum by categorizing different things with assigning a different word to these different categories from the continuum that is reality. So if you think of language as a framework and a way to classify reality, then it becomes more clear how it functions as a way of knowing and how our classification scheme of language affects perception. I hope this advice helped. If you want to know anything else about TOK, let me know in the comments. And as always, I'll see you later.